All right, Ann Stewart here, going live on a topic tonight that is relevant and necessary, and probably is going to be one that I share with a lot of our future clients moving forward. And I thought I would do a live. If anybody tends to get on and wants to ask any questions about this whatsoever, it is kind of the topic of the moment. There's a lot of misinformation about what's happening right now in the real estate industry. A lot of headline news are kind of saying one thing and really confusing so many people. So if you have not heard, there is what we call an NAR lawsuit happening. It's a lawsuit against our industry organization. I like to kind of call it like our union of sorts, but it's really a trade organization that kind of sets a lot of rules and standards and ethics and things like that in our industry. There is a lot of good that comes from it, but there has been a lot of scandal that has come from that place as well. And I won't get into all of it because it's its own topic. But needless to say, NAR, National Association of Realtors, got sued and lost effectively. And there are some changes coming up in our industry that are going to affect absolutely everyone, buyers, sellers, agents, and it's across the board. It's in the entire United States. So if you are watching this video and you're wanting to know, like, what is the changes that are going to affect you, then stay tuned because I'm going to get into it real raw, real straight tonight. Effectively, what goes on in our industry and has well, let me back up a minute and just kind of go into the history of buyer agency. So just as a statistic for your information, about 98% of all home sales in my MLS, there is a buyer's agent and there is a listing agent. So representation, we're talking about fiduciary duties, which is putting your interests, your buyers or your client's interest ahead of your own. And of course, buyers don't do this every day. They don't have enough time in the world to figure out how to buy and sell homes, including sellers. So they hire realtors like myself. And we do all the heavy lifting. We help guide them. We negotiate for them. We, coordinate closings and showings and the whole, A to Z, soup to nuts. And how it's always been for the better part of, I want to say close to 40 years, because I think it all started in the early 1990s, is that how a buyer's agent is and was paid, that's changing, is that the listing agent and the seller have an agreement about compensation, and then that listing agent takes a part of that agreed upon compensation and advertises it in the MLS. And then if the buyer agent brings a ready, willing, and able buyer and gets to closing, everybody gets paid that way. Now, before that all happened, and that's been going on for the better part of 40 some odd years, back in the 90s and before, here in Oregon, we were one of the first states in the union that started buyer agency, actually. Before that, guess what? All realtors worked for the seller only. The sellers were the only one who got representation. So there were listing agents, and then there was called sub-agents. And the buyers thought they were being represented by the sub-agents because oftentimes the sub-agents would open the door, show the house to the buyers, maybe answer some questions, but ultimately, and they would also probably help draft contracts, but they were not representing the buyer. If the buyer shared with them confidential information or in negotiations, that sub-agent and listing agent could use that information against the buyer. And so you could imagine buyers were like, this is not good. We want representation. We want somebody to represent our interests because we're negotiating a big asset. We want, representation makes perfect sense, right? So in 1990s, early 90s, there was actually a lawsuit, and the buyers finally said, enough is enough. We want representation. So they switched everything and said, okay, listing agent, you get to agree with the seller on what you're going to get paid compensation wise. And then you're going to take a part of that compensation and you're going to put it in the MLS as to what the buyer agent gets paid. So that's what we've been doing, guys, for the better part of, however long it's been since the 90s. Okay. And then the NAR lawsuit recently happened, and effectively two things is what they thought were happening. Now, whether they were or they weren't is the controversy, because the lawsuit started in Missouri and then it kind of perpetrated out to the rest of us. But effectively, it meant that we had to change a lot of standards because, number one, they want the buyer agent compensation to be removed from the MLS. And it doesn't mean that the buyer agent can't get paid by the seller, but it means that they don't want agents to be the one to see it and decide whether they're going to show that property or not. But the bigger change is that all buyers will need to sign a buyer broker agreement prior to working with an agent or seeing a house or even discussing anything about pricing opinions on houses, which is actually a good thing. Buyer broker agreements have been around for ages. They're very similar to a listing agreement where you sign a listing agreement with a listing agent and you say, this, you're my agent, you represent me. You go find a buyer, you put out your own money and time to go, market the house, etc. And if you get the deal done, you get closed at escrow. So now it's going to be where the buyers are going to sit down with the buyer's agent and they're going to talk about basically a listing agreement, a buyer's agreement to hire them for service, represent them in a fiduciary manner, and then the buyer is going to agree to pay whatever compensation that the agent and the buyer agree to. What we'll probably see is that many buyers will not be able to afford compensation in addition to closing costs and down payment, or maybe they don't want to based on what they've got going on. Either way, it's going to be common practice for buyers now to ask the seller to pay their agent. A lot of sellers are still going to pay the buyer's agent in addition to the listing agent. They don't have to. There will be scenarios. There will be, times when the seller won't or will pay partial. And then it will be up to the buyer to decide, okay, the rest is owed to my agent and that will come out of the buyer's pocket. Now, this is different because usually the buyer is focused on bringing their down payment, their closing costs to closing. And now it's possible that they're going to also owe the full buyer agent compensation, whatever that's agreed to, or part of it. So there will be scenarios depending on competition, I would imagine, where a buyer may say, you know what, I've got enough to cover this, but I don't have all of it. And so the seller say, okay, I'll pay $5,000, $10,000 towards your closing costs, and that'll help offset and neutralize your cost to close. So everything's going to be a whole heck of a lot more negotiable. Let's put it that way. But what I would encourage you as a buyer, if you're making a kind of purchase in a marketplace, especially if you're planning on moving to another market, is set yourself up for success. In essence, it doesn't necessarily mean a whole lot changes. About a third of our market has been using buyer service agreements, meaning agents have been at will to use them. They don't have to, they can. There's a lot of agents who make it a standard practice in their business to be able to say, hey, if I'm going to, commit to working with you, I'm asking for commitment back. But now more important than ever, it's about compensation. And what does that look like when you get to the closing table? So there's going to be more conversation around if a listing is something a buyer wants to pursue, what are the costs that buyer might have to incur beyond closing costs and down payment that they're going to have to allocate for. Now, again, I have the personal belief that a lot of sellers, especially after talking to a lot of clients, that they're going to be still willing to pay a buyer agent compensation. They understand that buyer agent compensation is potentially an incentive to bring a buyer to their house, because there will be buyers that are going to be specifically looking for a seller who is willing to pay the cost of it, just like they have been. So the confusion has often been that the seller, the confusion has been that everyone thinks buyer's agents are free. When you're on the buyer side, you don't really see it because it's not necessarily something coming out of your pocket, but it is a part of transaction fee. But now it's going to be more standard to bring transparency to the conversation. And that's really what our industry hasn't done well with, is how do we get paid and how does that work? Now the buyers are going to be required to understand that they are going to be deciding before they even go look at one single house, who is going to be representing them. And basically the buyer broker agreement is a for hire agreement. It's, hey, I'm signing up to work with you. No different than any other professional, honestly, you work with. When you go to hire a CPA, a attorney, a roofer, before you even go have them do any services for you, you understand what it is you might have to pay, and you understand who is going to be representing you and what the services are. So that's really what's going to happen. Now, for a lot of clients that come in from out of state, we have a ton of clients that come in from out of state. And a lot of times they're, not able to be physically here for a lot of the time, but they're on a search. And when the right property comes up, they want to be able to know they have somebody here, boots on the ground, ready to go and get the information they need and maybe do a virtual showing or whatnot. We're actually advising our clients to jump on a Zoom call with us, just like we normally do, to talk about this process, what they're looking for, but really to get kind of in tune with one another on what's the changes are happening. Now, technically speaking, the settlement, all the details I just kind of went over are not signed off on yet. It is subject to change, but we're pretty confident that there's going to be some of this happening in by July. And the confidence comes from the fact that all it needs is a judge's signature. There is another entity out there that is, has a little bit of a say in what can change, but ultimately this is what they've been aiming for. So I don't really see it changing too dramatically. So a lot of realtors are right now, at least in the state of Oregon, working on getting buyer broker agreements signed with their existing buyers and their future buyers, because we're right around the corner from July, right? We have some clients that we met with today, in fact, that are from California. They're still in town. We got a chance to meet with them and sit down and go over kind of the ins and outs of the market, what they're looking for, and then just kind of going over that they want us to represent them, which they do, and sign a buyer broker agreement. And so it's going to be real commonplace. And a lot of buyers are really, obviously comfortable with it because they want representation and they know how things work. But I wanted to get on here tonight to kind of explain it, because the media is sort of making a lot of salacious headlines, as they do. It's very common for, them to take little bits and pieces of truths and kind of like make it sound like buyers agents are going away, or, agents in general are going away. That's just not true. Now, will this weed out some of the agents who are working part-time or not taking this seriously, or just don't want to deal with the changes? Absolutely. And actually, I welcome that, because I always look at our profession as it's gotten a little bit diluted with the volume of agents who've come in hoping to make a quick buck. This is not a quick buck industry. It may have felt that way in 2020 and 2021, but truth be told, we're working harder than ever to service our clients and make sure that they're getting the attention and service they need. And that's okay. That's part of it. And so I think a lot of people are confused by the fact that they think we don't need agents, or what's happening, or, what percentage I should be paying, not be paying, et cetera, et cetera. Everything's negotiable, by the way. But I would encourage everyone to really find an agent you trust. At the end of the day, you want somebody that you feel is going to represent you and your needs and that you mesh well with. That's really part of it, because it's a very intimate purchase. This is not something that, you should take lightly. We always encourage people to read our Google reviews. We've got we have over 100 reviews online between Angie's List and Google, but we have close to 70 reviews on 5-star reviews. And, those are real people that are sharing their experience with working with us. And I think everyone should, look into references and talk to the agent about how do they work and how do they like to communicate and all those things, because moving forward, you're going to be signing a document that is ensuring that that agent is going to do the job they say they were going to do in the beginning. Don't just flippantly sign something without, maybe interviewing the agent. Similar to a listing agent, when you sit down and meet with a listing agent to talk about pricing, you're also saying, who are you? How are you going to market my house? How are we going to work together? And that agent should be able to competently explain how they work and what they think about property and pricing and all that. Same with the buyer agent side. If an agent is not asking you to have a buyer consultation to talk about what the market's doing, what their goals are, and to talk about how we work well together and how we effectively move forward with a buyer broker agreement, that should be a red flag, because moving forward, it's going to be for the professional agents only. And yes, we will see some attrition happening in our industry. I'm already seeing it. I already know a bunch of agents who are like tapping out, and that's okay. That hopefully means that good agents will be here. And there are a lot of great agents, everybody. Like, agents are being demonized a lot in the media right now. And I get it, that it's, part of it is our fault for not being transparent and having better systems in place. But the good news is, usually with big changes like this, it will create an environment of more trust, more professionalism, and the ability for people to know exactly who they're working with and what they're getting. So yeah, I just want to come on here and kind of go and do a live about this topic. Like I mentioned, there's a lot of salacious news out there. And if you are interested in talking to us about doing a buyer consultation, there is absolutely no obligation to work together. Sometimes it's just important to say, hey, I'm thinking about doing this, or I'm thinking about moving to the Portland metro area, and I need to know what that looks like. And here's my needs. And is this going to be a good fit, good match? And I always encourage people to interview us because you need to know what you're getting and who we are and what we're willing to do to help you meet your goals. And certainly with the new changes coming into the marketplace, it's a great opportunity for us to get to know each other and make sure that we are a good fit. Every once in a blue moon, there's somebody looking for something that we just don't feel that we can confidently find the right property for that person for whatever reason, or the expectations of the market might be very different than what we feel we can deliver. And that's okay too, but you won't know until you schedule some time to meet with us and kind of go through that. But I'm very confident in our services. I believe in what we do. Erica and I work our tails off for the clients that we work with, and our 5-star reviews show it. So we're always encouraging people to, if you're looking for a great agent, we want to interview for the job of being your agent. We are hell of a negotiators. We're high level communicators, and we are kind of no BS. We often will be telling you things you may not want to hear. Maybe we're going to walk into a house and say, I know you love it, but here's some things you need to be aware of that are not great about the house, because we want that relationship down the road. We don't want you being misadvised, and we want you to say, hey, Ann and Erica told us that if we bought on this busy road, this would affect our resale value. So it's not a surprise when that happens someday, but we still told you up front. So anyway, that's kind of how we like to operate. We like to have full transparency, but that's, kind of what's going on out here. So just to kind of reiterate, because I know that was kind of a lot in a little bit of time, is buyer broker agreements, which are service agreements to hire an agent, are going to be mandatory come July, sometime in the middle of July. Actually, Oregon might be sooner than that because they're revising the buyer broker service agreements as we speak. And the MLS will no longer show or reflect a compensation for the buyer's agent. There will be other methods that will be reflective of what that could look like. And we're waiting from leadership to find out what that is. But in the meantime, that's the gist. If you're thinking about making a move to the Portland area, again, we'd love to help you. Hit us up. All of our contact information is in the description below. You can email us, text us. We can hop on a Zoom call. We would love to help. All right, signing off. Have a good night.